This talk is the second in the series on forgiveness and is titled, How Does One Forgive? We learn to forgive by seeking the heart of God, which is love. As we discern God, the Father's heart, Jesus' sacrifice, and the Holy Spirit's leading, we become more eager to forgive. It involves always being ready to do the difficult work of repairing and reconciling. If we try to forgive and pray for the ability to forgive, even when we are not yet able to, we open ourselves all the more to the experience of God's tender mercy towards us, enabling us to extend that mercy and compassion towards others. The Lord is the active agent in promoting forgiveness, and He uses our acts as vehicles to accomplish His agency. As we continue to deeper understand what it means to forgive as Christ did, let us consider the connection between love and forgiveness, as the two cannot be separated from each other. God's people are responsible to proclaim the good news of the gospel, which includes the forgiveness of all sin. We read this in John 20:23. This can only happen through love. Love cannot be experienced in a fallen world without forgiveness. A Christian perspective of love and forgiveness must start with God and be consistent with God's eternal relational paradigm of love. Loving God is a response to God's indwelling love. As God initiates love, His children respond out of gratitude. The affections, thoughts, and will are reoriented in a Godward direction, evidenced by the command that one should walk in the way of love, be rooted and grounded in love, and bear fruit in love. Jesus modified the second aspect of the command to love when He said, "Love one another just as I have loved you." It is a source of deep joy to know that God can be trusted. Lack of forgiveness of self and others can result in guilt and shame. Therefore, self-forgiveness and communitarian dimensions of forgiveness, shame, and guilt also need to be considered. Forgiveness involves making right relationships. In the Hebrew Bible, these aspects were applied to the temple, the family, the courtroom, business dealings, treatment of widows, aliens, orphans, and the poor, and most of all, to relationships with God. In the New Testament, it involves a process of restoration after an act of injustice has taken place. Self-forgiveness is called for when guilt, self-hatred, and shame reach high levels and become disproportionate. In offending others, one also does moral damage to oneself by disregarding one's moral standards and becoming an insensitive, disloyal, abusive, or deceitful person. Also, ongoing negative feelings towards oneself could be problematic, as it does not allow for change to occur. Forgiveness or the assurance by others that the offenses are forgivable can allow self-forgiveness to move towards completion. Self-forgiveness involves cultivating self-compassion, self-generosity, and self-love. When one forgives oneself, one commences an emotional shift away from self-blame, guilt, and shame, putting for the time being one's offenses in the past. The offender must believe in his or her capacity for moral change. Self-forgiveness aims not at the elimination of these feelings, but at their control, preventing them from becoming excessive, unwarranted, or malicious. One major contribution towards forgiving oneself is to experience forgiveness from those one has hurt, to experience their love again. How do we compare forgiveness of self and forgiveness of others? Forgiveness of others is granted by the victim. Forgiveness of self is offered by the offender. Both take place in the course of a process that concerns harm being done purposely or out of negligence. Each offers a new beginning after a trespass. When one decides to forgive, it usually involves not only forgiving a particular offense done by oneself or others, but also the kind of person someone is. If resisted, both continue to disturb and unsettle the possible forgiver. Genuine forgiveness is granted on the condition that one regrets the offense, changes one's behavior, and takes responsibility for the harm. Lack of forgiveness of self or of the other can result in guilt or shame, or both, as love is lost. How does one therefore deal with guilt and shame? Guilt differs from shame in several ways. Guilt is caused by choices and acts contrary to what the person admits to be morally right. The person wants to repair whatever harm has been done and move towards a positive direction and change. There is a much higher desire for persons to take responsibility for their actions rather than put the blame onto others. Shame is viewed as a public emotion where the offender feels exposed and open to public ridicule. It is guilt which keeps shame hidden. By removing the veil of guilt, we are able to see the shame and acknowledge its role. Guilt can be associated with specific behaviors, whether they are acts of commission or of omission. Guilt feelings may easily be mistaken for shame, and vice versa. Feelings of guilt involve a sense of regret, remorse, and tension about the offense committed. They initiate and encourage a reparative process in which admission of truth, apology, and making amends play important roles. Intense guilt feelings about wrongdoing can turn towards self-loathing, spill into one's identity, and become transformed into pervasive shame. Thus, shame is seen as toxic to social and psychological functioning, while guilt is not. Feelings of guilt can involve a sense of regret or remorse, and a nagging focus or preoccupation with a specific transgression. A person experiencing shame may have difficulty trying to think of effective solutions to interpersonal problems and may create a desire to hide and escape from the situation. The emotion of shame creates a sense in the person of shrinking and feeling small. Individuals who experience shame find it much more difficult to seek forgiveness from the victim and themselves. Shame can arise directly from shaming practices engaged in by significant others, or indirectly through judgmental cultural beliefs and values that have been imposed or are passively internalized. The process of healing shame is to assimilate the negative experiences concerning the self into a modified self-concept. The lifting of shame moves a person once more into communion with God, and they recognize that they are beloved by God. There are many benefits to forgiving many benefits to relieving oneself from shame and the guilt. We will hear in the next talk more about the benefits of forgiveness.